Serious. People who had to clean out rooms of someone who had died, family, friend or otherwise. Did you find anything you shouldn't have found, and how did it make you feel? My grandmother passed after a blood clot incident. She had several conditions that no doubt led up to this. For example, her medical team decided not to treat her breast cancer because they figured she would die before it would spread. My father, uncle, and my sisters were left to clean out her things from her apartment. She had a lot of old, expired food, like ketchup that had gone completely black. We found things from when she was well and social, like her quilting and handmade soaps, which were beautiful. She has a quilt that had the names of all of our family, but the names were sewn in the individual's handwriting style. However, one day it was just my dad and me going through her bedside table. We found her journal. Toward the end, all of the entries were about how lonely she was, how she only got to see her grandchildren twice a year, and how her own children never saw her unless they needed something. She said she wanted to die. My dad threw it away so his brother would never have to see it. So, yeah? Go hug a grandparent. After my grandmother had a stroke-like incident, my stepmom saw it as a great excuse to kick me out of the house. So, I went to go live with her so that when she died someone would be there. When she had her stroke, she laid in the bathtub for 3 days before someone came to her house. She didn't die on my watch, though I lived there almost 2 years. I did get to see the loneliness set in. One day we were watching TV together, and she just started crying, and I asked what was up, and she just looked at me and said, "All my friends are dead." I tried to hang out with her as much as possible before I moved away for college. The last time I saw her when I was leaving, she gave me a big hug and said, "I'm gonna die soon, and when I do, don't waste time or money coming back from my funeral. I know you love me." My dad was a pretty reserved guy. While I knew in my heart he would lay down and die for me without a moment's hesitation, he never said, "I love you," or "I'm proud of you," or anything like that. It's just who he was. After he died of cancer, we went to his office to clear it out. I'd never really been in his actual office since, on the rare occasions I'd see him at work, he'd usually meet me at reception. Well, when we went in there, it was practically a shrine to me and my sister. Every certificate, photo, newspaper clipping, program, etc. was hung up on the walls of his office. A number of people came by to pay their respects as we were clearing things out, and again I heard, "He was so proud of you. I've heard so many things about you. It's nice to meet you in person. You were so special to your father. He spoke the world of you. Honestly, you could have knocked me over with a feather." Definitely one of the more bittersweet moments in my life. R.I.P. Dad. Miss you. One of the amazing things about funerals memorials is you hear so many stories about the deceased. When my dad died, I found out that my parents had run off to Tijuana to get married, and only found out several months later that the state of CA didn't recognize the marriage. They were living in sin. Very scandalous for 1964. They ran out to a local court and got a judge to marry them legally. It's kind of mind-blowing to realize my parents were once young and dumb, just like me. That's the one super cool, super weird thing about those stories. You hear something and you think, "My dad? No way. My dad would never do that." And then you realize your dad wasn't always in his 40s. He wasn't always balding with a bum shoulder. He was 15, 18, 21, 26. He did stupid shit. He drove cross-country in a muscle car and smoked pot. He was front row at a Springsteen concert or 7. He embarrassed himself once or 8 times in front of the woman who became your mom before she was even his girlfriend. It's so hard to realize there was a life before you because you see multiple sides of the person, but you never really see all sides. My best friend was killed in a car accident when he was 15. I was like another son to his parents, and a few weeks after his death, his mother asked me to come over to help go through his things. Mainly because we basically treated our clothes as one gigantic wardrobe and half the stuff in his closet was mine, including the shirt he was wearing when he was killed. When we first went into his room, his mom said to me, "You have 10 minutes to remove anything you don't want me to see," and she handed me a duffel bag. I shut the door behind me, pulled out his sock drawer and took out the dime bag I had stashed there. Then I lifted his mattress and grabbed the 2 Penthouse magazines and the video my brother gave us. I zipped up the bag and opened the door. Together we went through his stuff, me grabbing my clothes and her giving me his clothes that she knew I wore all of the time. After a few minutes, I decided to play some music. I turn on his stereo and hit play on the cassette player, and Journey's Faithfully starts playing. After a few seconds, dubbed over the song, is my friend's voice, saying mushy things to this girl he's been crushing on since 8th grade. I listened for a minute, then I just bust out laughing. That shit was so corny that I couldn't help it. Once I started laughing, his mom starts laughing and crying at the same time. It was the first time she had laughed since the accident, and later she said it was a turning point for her in her grieving process. To me, it was my best friend just being goofy over some girl. I still think about him almost every day, even though it's been 31 years. My grandma died when I was 16 after getting cancer for the 3rd time. My granddad moved into a smaller apartment, and my cousins and I helped to clean out their house. A side note: there are 9 of us, aged at the time from 12 to 26. In the house, we found more than 20 wrapped presents and envelopes of money, addressed to all of us. They were for the big occasions that she knew she wouldn't live to see us have. Before she had died, she had organized 21st birthday presents for those of us who weren't yet 21, engagement presents, and wedding presents, each with a card written by hand. I remember being so overwhelmed with emotion. She was an incredible woman who loved her family dearly and wanted to celebrate her grandchildren, even if she couldn't be there herself. Edit: we did wait to open the presents. Many are still unopened. I recently got married, and I opened a present full of linen, a few tea towels and towels, which Grandma had embroidered herself, as well as some antique lace doilies that had belonged to her mother. It was very special, and quite surreal. When my mother was killed by her ex-husband, I was one of the people tasked with packing our house. He stalked her, and would break into the house often. My mother knew, but no one else did. As a result, when we were taking things down, like pictures and such, we would find things hidden behind them. Items such as checkbooks to hidden bank accounts from him. Or even worse, notebooks full of dates and accounts of events where he would engage her. She had a restraining order on him. Usually these engagements, according to the notebook, were awful. Tires being slashed, her being followed, and him coming up to her on day-to-day events berating her. The thing is though, she kept it all secret from the family. What makes it so hard is if she would have told every one of these things, she might still be here today. My great-aunt died at 100 years old, and I got her fairly new Samsung TV. The TV turned out to be 3D, but she only had one eye. I couldn't shake the thought that some salesman sold an old lady with one eye a 3D TV. My dad's grandmother was a huge hoarder. When she died, he had to go clear out the house, which was no easy task. My dad always tells us about how you couldn't even see the walls of the house because of the amount of stuff she had lying around, and how she looked so tiny walking around in the little hallways she managed to make in between all kinds of objects. After several days of trying to clear out the house, my dad finally made it to her bedroom. It was completely filled with all kinds of things, ranging from like 20 kinds of brooms to several harps she had bought during her long trips to Europe. He found all kinds of surprising stuff, but the one that ended up being the craziest one was a letter. He found it in her bedside table, and it caught his attention because of the wax seal and what was written on the envelope. To be opened by my daughter, only after my death. My dad called his mom immediately, since she was his grandmother's only daughter. After getting her permission, he opened the envelope and found a letter and a birth certificate. In the letter, his grandmother explained how she was never able to have children, and how ashamed she and her husband always felt, big Catholics, beginning of 20th century Mexico. She always wanted to have a child, so they decided to take a very long trip through Europe, from which they would come back with a baby. This baby was my dad's mom, who always looked a bit different from her family, as white as it can be, bluest eyes you've ever seen. They found her in an orphanage run by some nuns in the north of France, and immediately fell in love with her. Adoption was a big taboo at the time, so no one ever knew about it. The story they told was that she had gotten pregnant during their trip and had given birth to the baby in Europe. They brought her back to Mexico and registered her as a newborn, even though she was already several years old. My grandmother lived all her life thinking she was her parents' biological daughter. At 45, through a letter, she found out that she was adopted, that she was actually older than what she always thought, and that she was actually French, not Mexican. My dad had to tell her all of this through the phone, while trying to understand a birth certificate written in French. My grandma eventually ended up hiring a private investigator and finding her family in France. But that's another story. Do you have a similar story? Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this one.